Well, good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this, our third climate conference session, focusing on place, which of course is a central and inherent theme in economic development strategy and practice here in Scotland. The places we live, work and enjoy, how they are designed, invested in and used have the potential to nurture or deplete humankind and the planet. And so the choices and decisions we make are more vital now than they have ever been. What we do as economic development strategists and practitioners is important. It has huge potential for good or ill in this arena, and mindful and considered planning and investment is key to what lies ahead. Economic development is now occupying a more holistic space where the social and environmental consequences of development are as essential as the economic ones. This belief is at the heart of our EDAS strategy and thinking in the years ahead. Through this conference series and the many events we run, we're encouraging fresh thinking and broader conversations with a wider audience of stakeholders that includes both those who work in economic development and those who contribute to economic well-being, but who don't necessarily identify as economic development professionals. Our events are about opening spaces for creative dialogue and inviting these many voices to share, to learn, and to collaborate. So I'm really delighted to welcome you all here this afternoon, and also our host for today's conference, Dermot Lawler, Associate Director with the Scottish Futures Trust, someone who has brought tremendous energy and planning creativity and expertise to Scotland's architecture and design policy and planning community for many years, and who I know is passionate about today's place theme. I hope this afternoon will be inspiring and engaging as we explore the possibilities around climate change and place and the role of economic development in this sphere. I'm really looking forward to hearing from the incredible speakers we have here today and who you can see are listed on our agenda slide. And also to hearing from you, our audience who are immersed in these issues. From an EDAS perspective, we want to hear what you're doing, what are the challenges you face, and how we can help you. And we will have some polling that takes place throughout the afternoon to help us define that. So with that in mind, and to get us started, I'm handing over to you, Dermot. Thank you.
Very much. Thanks very much, Liz, and thanks everybody for making the time to be with us today. Absolutely delighted to be with you and to have such a fantastic opportunity. And looking across the agenda that Liz and colleagues have set out, it struck me that there's kind of four really interesting themes and challenges from it. The first one is that the context of place matters. So we've got some rural discussion, some urban discussion, and then some smaller kind of templates. So the context matters and the authenticity of it, like so that the real story, the real place, driving the real needs. So number one, context. Number two, it's about the approaches, holistic approaches to joining up things, joining up investment, joining up opportunities in those places for the right reasons. Number three, then it's about attracting and using investment in the right way for the right reasons. And number four, and really interesting around Leonora's work around the impacts and the outputs of that. So context matters, authenticity should drive it. That allows us to kind of attract in the investment and to make the impacts for the most benefit for the most people for the right reasons. So really looking forward to hosting today's event. And in the first section, we've got a fantastic array of speakers in. Sam Castles, who's the Place Principal Advisor in Scottish Government, just going to give us some insights and provocations actually in a two-way kind of conversation. And Sam likes to be provoked, so please get ready with the chat and put in some of your thoughts about what are some of the challenges that you have around making places work. And then following that, we've got Colin Banks, brilliant from the south of Scotland Enterprise Agency, and looking at that rural and regional context and how that comes together. And then we also have Leonora Gercheva, who's going to talk about donut economics and the Amsterdam and the city kind of model, how that comes together. And then we'll follow that with some chat, engagement and discussion. So the first thing that I'd really like for all of you to do is, if you don't mind, is in the chat button, we'll have a Mentimeter polling as well, but please use the chat so that we can kind of follow the discussions going. And one of the things that I think would be really good will be the challenges, the two or three challenges that you have around taking holistic approaches in places to join up investments. So as the day goes, please use the chat, address the questions, and we'll come back and follow that through. Throughout the program today, we've got a series of polls, and then you'll be invited to kind of poll, and then we'll feed that back. And I think that the Menti, I see that Brian was having some challenges on Menti. So hopefully that's fixed. And then we'll come up to our first poll. And then we'll just invite you to kind of join in on that. And then we'll feed that back and then get into the presentation and discussion. So with that, Elaine and colleagues, if we could maybe go to the first poll, and if you can just work us through how to go and do the polling, Alison, and then we'll get into that just now.
Hi there, I've just shared the link to join in the chat box, and you should be able to also scan it with your QR code if you want to do it on your phone. I'll just leave that up just now.
So colleagues just need to scan it with the phone, as you say, Alison.
Yeah, or the links in the chat box for your desktop.
Okay. Excellent. So hopefully that's working for everybody, and then that'll bring you into the actual questions, and we'll see that in a second.
Yeah, yeah. Once you scan it, you'll see the QR code on your phone.
Super.
Okay, well, if people are joining, the link is in the chat box, so I think we can move to the next one.
Okay, Doug.
Okay, this is just to test the system. So what sector do you work in? It's a nice, easy one to start. Hopefully, you know.
Okay, so a good spread. I see Louisa has said that she can't see the link, Alison, in the chat.
Okay.
Yep.
I'll just put it again there for you, Louisa.
There you go, Louisa. That's in now. Okay, a really good spread. So good representation from the public sector, and really welcome participation by the third sector, community and private. So that's brilliant. And hopefully we'll be able to kind of get that diversity of voices that kind of come in, bring insights and challenge into it. So really welcome everybody. It's amazing, this technology. It can kind of tell you things that you don't know immediately. So.
Okay, I think that's quite a good cross section. So I'll move on to the next question.
Thanks, Alison.
Okay, to what extent is your organisation currently focused on helping places benefit from the transition to a net zero future? I'll let you think about that one. And it's also organised by sector from the previous question.
Okay. Okay, interesting, just the way that the pattern is emerging, so that nobody so far has said that it has no focus or no value, so that's really good. Interesting to see the private sector around more on the moderate side, I would say, than the top side, but a good clustering of public, third sector, and also community around one of the kind of top priorities. So an interesting balance. And then a couple of the colleagues on the call is that it's the main bit. So a big cluster around it. It's a big agenda for many people, so that's good. And that there's opportunities, I suppose, learning and working with the private sector around how that moderate focus could be understood a bit better, and what we could do to help around that. So that seems like a great spread. Thank you.
Great. There's a few more have just joined. I think there are some internet issues across the country today, so I'm just sharing the joining link for the poll again.
Super.
Okay, so I'll just nip on to the next question, which is, what are the two top challenges you're facing in relation to helping places benefit from the transition to a net zero future? So you can type your two top challenges. You can use separate notes, and they'll start to populate the screen.
Super. Mm-hmm.
So it seems to be a few funding and resource comments coming in.
Yeah.
People, resources and funding, technical. So what we can do, we can pull all these together after the event and see funding and finances seem to be, and resources keep coming up, so we can actually do a wee cross section to see how that looks.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. I suppose just gonna, as you say, Alison, those issues have come up a lot, but there's also an interesting bit around language and access. How do you get into this stuff? How do you make sense of this stuff? And also around the capacity, the right skills, the people to do it. You know, so if we can't explain what the stuff is and how you get into it, we don't know what the skills are. And an interesting bit around the baselining of where do you measure the net zero context of a place? Like, where do you start from? How do you do it? And then wrapping around it, as you say, it's the issues of cuts, finance, but also where do you get the available funds and finance? And an interesting one here on the bottom about balancing needs of different communities. So the different context, but also that authenticity thing. So if in a rural community, there's something really driving us, but it's not the same as the regional agenda or the national agenda, how do we deal with that so that we get the right impact for the right people for the right way? So something interesting around access, something interesting around awareness, something interesting also then just around authenticity. So access, awareness and authenticity, I think are a number of challenges. And as you say, the funding and finance pieces wrap around it. So we'll just see where we're at. Is it possible just to just scan up? Okay, yeah. So agreement of the different priorities. So as you say, the accessibility, make the language, the authenticity, but also agreement. Okay, that's great. That's great. Brilliant. Thanks so much, Alison.
I'll leave that on. I'll take this off, but I can leave the question open if anyone else thinks of anything else.
Yeah.
Okay.
Brilliant. Okay, well, just as it was picking on, I mean, a really rich amount of information shared with colleagues, but I suppose it'd be also quite good if we can carry that through the chat. So some of the nuances of those challenges, but also some of the ways that you've tackled those challenges will be great in the chat, and then we can share it and open it up. And maybe just to kind of draw on three in particular, just from what you said. There's something around making the whole agenda accessible and understandable. So what is it we're talking about? How do you get into it? There's something about that authenticity piece around, you know, what's right for rural, what's right for town, what's right for city. So are we really capturing the right story about the right needs? And also there's something then about how do you get agreement across disparate sectors, disparate groups, different bodies, so that we're getting some consensus on what to focus on, how to focus on it, and how to get the big impact. So I'm delighted to use that as a way of kind of introducing Sam, who is the Place Principal Advisor in Scottish Government, and also to invite your own reflections on some of those challenges, Sam, about how do we make the Place agenda accessible? How do we make sure that it's authentic to the needs of people? And then how do we get agreement on priorities to drive action to make it work for everyone? So with that, Sam, if I could invite you to come to the floor, share your slides, and look forward to your presentation.
Thanks very much, Dermot. Thanks for the easy questions. Hopefully the server will support me on this. I've been having problems this morning. Welcome, everybody. I'm Place Principal Advisor. What the hell does that mean? A lot of us, some people in this call, help co-author the Place Principle. And it's great words, which I believe in, but that mean as it goes. But how do we turn the words into practice on the ground? Some of those issues that Dermot raised and some of the issues that were raised in that poll there, very impressive poll, by the way, Alison, are at the heart of what I worry about. And it's a crowded landscape. I'm not going to try and go through all the government policies just now. You know, we've got the Place Principle, we've got the Place-Based Investment Programme, 325 million over 5 years. You've got Town Centre Action Plan and things related to that, Town Centre Living, and you've got the vast behemoth, which is NPF4, just going through post-consultation, which deals with many of the same issues. So I want to talk through those. But in looking at those, my cut on some of those questions, which were just asked, actually, in response to some of the points Dermot focused on, were really fourfold. Some terms of the challenges I face inside government and dealing with partners. One is accountability. Most agencies, most government organisations centrally have some objectives and adherence to alignment's a good word. We're aligned with the place principle. But are people really accountable? Are we, government, our national bodies across the country, are we actually being accountable for taking on the place principle precepts? In particular, making sure that everything we do is relevant to a place and everything we do is for the benefit of all the people in that place. So first of all, accountability, I think, is a fundamental thing. Secondly, conditionality. Everyone who's ever applied for a grant gets a whole bunch of conditions, depending who they ask it from, and they end up with dozens of these bleeding things. Loads of performance indicators, lots of different criteria. Is that consistent? No. Is it joined up? Usually not. So we certainly need to have a more consistent and joined up set of conditions for how we support and how we just help to distribute resources with partners. Not the same, not kind of mandatory, this is what everything's got to be, but just make sure there's some link between them. So that conditionality is really important, I think, to give heft to the place principle. Thirdly, coordination. And it's fine for many of us in the call who either deal at a local authority level or a regional level or a national level to say to people on the ground, you should be more coordinated. But it's also very, very fine for them to say back to us, but you guys aren't coordinated. How often do we go into a place and another agency or another portfolio, another government department turns up and does something which we're unaware of, which isn't linked up to what we're actually trying to achieve? So that need to coordinate is really a desperate, not desperate, it's too strong a word, Sam, but really a priority for how we make sure that we're not creating work on the ground. And that plays into the fourth thing, which is capacity. Resources, particularly the current climate, I won't start to comment on just where we are with the overall resources available to everything we're trying to do, but certainly we can make life easier for people by not using people's time in an abortive fashion, covering so much ground, try and make it easier for them, and by making sure that expertise that is available from either specialist bodies or from inside government or from departments, whatever, that expertise is more accessible and it helps people on the ground to do it. People can't be experts on everything all the time. That doesn't mean we take away their agency. That doesn't mean we take away their power and tell them what to do. It just means we need to support them at the right moment in time. So those four things to me seem really fundamental: accountability, conditionality, coordination, and capacity. And you're pleased to hear we're doing a whole bunch of things about each of those, which I haven't time to go into today. Have the next slide. I would like to raise four messages which are kind of consistent across a whole bunch of policy areas, because there's always a place paragraph in pretty much every policy document these days. So the obvious one, take a place-based approach. When should we take a place-based approach? There you go, always, there you go. An international landscape firm called Martha Schwartz always used to argue you should never visit a site without starting about a kilometre away from the site. You know, difficult to coast, but otherwise fine. So that need to understand the context of a project, the context of an investment, the context of an issue or a problem or a site. That seems to me a fundamental aspect of what we're trying to do in terms of holistically work out what do we need to do to improve the circumstances of a person's life and the place they live in. For example, there's no point in rationalising, if we turn to zero carbon, no point in rationalising if we take, and I've done it myself working with organisations, where we've got 4 buildings, we'll rationalise into one. We'll build a new one. Great, we're carbon footprint. The place has now got 5 buildings. The place had 4 buildings, now it's got 5 buildings. So unless we take that place-based approach to how we measure our success, we really don't know winning or losing. And there's no point in efficiency if you locate things in the wrong place. The classic example would be if we build lots and lots of really efficient, very, very, very efficient passive houses in the wrong place where people need to drive for 10 miles to connect into their services. That ain't really a zero carbon approach, and it doesn't really take into account the impact on the rest of the area. Now, second one, please, Alison. Make well-being our purpose. Sounds rather grand, but it's what, from a government point of view, we say we're doing. We talk about the well-being. Scotland belongs to that small group of nations, which I think is New Zealand, Iceland, Canada, and ourselves, probably forgotten one, who talk about, look, the way we measure our success isn't simply with gross value added, GDP, but it is about what's the well-being of our populace. And if we don't take that on board right at the start and understand the end game, then we're always in the habit of the particular for IT. We're in the exact situation as everybody on this call. What's your plans? Where are we going? What we're trying to achieve? What kind of outcomes? And that's fine. That's fine. But the only point in doing those is if they have an impact on well-being on the ground. And well-being, I used to be in architecture, then moved to economics, and well-being continuously fell into that category of an externality or a spillover effect. Is something that is in the last paragraph of the business case, sometimes in the first paragraph of the business case, but very rarely in the 100 pages in the middle, which really drives what we're trying to achieve and really drives the decision-making process. I see Dermot's got a comment. I might be dropping out sometimes. I do apologise. The next one, please, Alison. Help people to live well locally. My cut on the 20-minute neighbourhood. I live in a rural setting. 20 minutes will just get me into the middle of the field somewhere. But the fundamental thing that's about is how do we help people to live well locally, and that applies across a whole bunch of policies where we need to start with local, understand what local life is, what's the story, the authenticity that Dermot talked about, what is happening in this place, what's the story of this place, where it's going, and we need to finish with local. Having gone through our policies, having reorganized ourselves, having put resources in the right place, having invested in the right things, at the end of the day, the measure is what's the impact of people's local lives. Next one, please. And finally, of the four, take leadership, not ownership. What do I mean by that? Sitting around a table with 30 people or more, this kind of size and face to face. We have discussions about, so who's going to take the lead on this? Or, well, it's really collective leadership, Sam. We'll all take leadership on this. And then everyone leaves the room. Or it's not my responsibility. Or that's not actually what we do, Sam. If we take the 1, 2, and 3, then who's going to take the leadership? Because somebody needs to take leadership on the ground. We need to begin where we are. I'm a great believer in the power of what I call the first responder, not in the emergency services sense, obviously. If someone's on the ground doing lots of great stuff, then let's get behind them. It's a hell of a good starter. Or if you're the, excuse the term, the biggest gorilla in the forest with the most resources or the most money or the biggest project that's happening, then I think there is a responsibility to take the weight on those shoulders of what we're trying to do across the whole place. Is that fair? Probably not. But if we persist in only taking leadership on those things we are specifically responsible for, then collaborative decision-making, collective leadership will really consist of quarterly meetings that won't really impact on what we really do and change what we do, not just how we do it. So begin anywhere, collaborate a lot, and know how to let go, please. And just finally, I'd like to leave you with, Alison, next slide, please, a quotation from the COVID recovery strategy. You know, this is the geography of inequality in Scotland. So I'll read this out. I know you can all read, but I think this is really important. The COVID recovery strategy, in talking about difference between least and most disadvantaged areas, said, those in the most deprived areas are 18 times more likely to suffer a drugs-related death, 4 times more likely to die from alcohol, 3 times more likely to die by suicide, twice as likely to die from COVID, and can expect 20 years less healthy life. So that's happening today, tomorrow, the day after. And there's system change happening. There's people doing wonderful things. There's whole new ways of working emerging, particularly post-COVID. But meanwhile, this is happening day to day. So I suppose a plea would be to all the folk on this call, and a reminder to myself is, can we please, in the meanwhile, find out what matters most in a place, work with what we have, whatever that is, and do what we can to make a difference now. I'll stop there. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Sam. Thanks, brilliant. Absolutely excellent. Thanks for that. And a really powerful message about the context of investment that a holistic approach and price allows us to take to improve people's circumstance, but also a really powerful provocation around the leaderships needed to drive it forward on that bit. So really helpful. Thanks so much, Sam. And if we could follow that with Colin Banks from the South of Scotland Enterprise Agency, and Colin's going to talk about the regional approach and the net zero work that you're doing down there in the South of Scotland. So Colin, if you wouldn't mind taking the floor, please.
Yes, thank you. Can you see my slides, Dermot?
Can indeed, Colin. Perfect.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to everyone today. And just my internet's a little bit unstable too, so just there may be times when I drop in and out. But really, what I'd like to kind of share with everyone is the regional approach that we're taking forwards here in the South of Scotland. Some of the things that we have been doing, and some of the things that we plan to do. And my role at South of Scotland Enterprise is the net zero strategy lead. So my task is to kind of weave a lot of what we've already discussed together. So very quickly, a bit of context. Here's the South of Scotland, and primarily, I just wanted to throw that up there just to kind of frame the regional place here. So it's effectively Dumfries and Galloway local authority area and Scottish Borders local authority area. So that's kind of the sense of place and the framework within which we're approaching. And again, very quickly, just I suppose covering some of the planet, place, people, prosperity angle in terms of some of the overarching aims that SOCIA was established here to do, and we've been in operation since April 2020, so 2 years into the work that we're doing. But again, I think a lot of the aims for the agency resonate with some of the opening remarks from both Dermot and Sam. So we're kind of looking at the regional approach to net zero in three key areas. One is looking internally at what we're doing. So walking the talk, you know, if we're going to be asking our clients who are businesses, social enterprises, enterprise and communities out in the region to do some of the hard carbon emission savings, we need to also be doing that ourselves and leading the way. I'll come on to carbon literacy because we think that's a huge underpinning to the work that we're doing. And also our footprint. But again, picking up on that leadership point that Sam was talking to, I think we also need to be open and humble and transparent in what we're doing and sharing what we're doing. We're going to get some things right, we're going to get some things wrong, but if we can share that knowledge, we're only going to be better for it and collaborate with others. So I think really it's an ask of us to kind of be open and transparent about what we're doing. In terms of our clients, it's really understanding our clients, those communities, those places, those businesses, their journey themselves and how they get onto their journey, what tools and resources and support and fundings out there, how can we stimulate innovation and things that haven't happened yet. And then on a regional perspective, I'm going to talk a little bit about our approach in terms of developing a South of Scotland route map, some of the just transition plans, how that ties in with national just transition plans, the commission. So we're talking about collaboration and that partnership and taking collective responsibility. So for just a quick kind of touch on in terms of climate and carbon literacy. So this was kind of bottom up. This is from about 18 months ago as an agency, as a group of us said, you know, we want to ensure that net zero is right at the heart of the organization. We pitched to our board and management team that we wanted carbon literacy to be rolled out across the organization. We put that in our operating plan. We wanted to get that foundational knowledge of what we mean by net zero across the whole organization, be that the board, be that IT, legal, be that our client-facing teams. So we got that commitment. The senior leadership team and the board last summer went through the Royal Scottish Geographical Society's Climate Solutions training. We went out to tender in autumn last year. So this is also giving you a sense of the timeline it takes to kind of do this piece of work. But we went out and contracted with some consultants to develop and deliver our own carbon literacy training. We own that training. That's something that we can deliver in-house now. We can do that as part of our induction process. Every new start that comes into the organization will be carbon literate. We have about 140, 150 staff, 120 staff have already been through the carbon literacy training. and we've currently have a bronze accreditation through the Carbon Literacy Project. So we want to continue on that. It's certainly embedded carbon literacy and net zero into the organisation. It's certainly empowering. People are coming forward with ideas and suggestions of how they want to take that forward, how they want to take some of their own pledges forward. We also recognise that there's a need to regionally establish what I'm kind of framing as a consortium of regional partners and organisations that can go out and deliver that consistent content around climate and carbon literacy. We know that local authorities are interested in delivering that in the region. We know both colleges in the region are deliver carbon management training, carbon accounting training. So how do we ensure that that message is consistent across all those delivery partners? And also, how do we roll this out? So, we've done that in-house. How do we now start to engage our clients with it? With businesses, social enterprises, communities through those delivery partners. So we kind of fundamentally see that understanding that carbon literacy and climate literacy brings is helping this particular piece of work. Now I've thrown up the social footprint here, not to kind of tell you what our own footprint is, but just for me, it's really to kind of I suppose look at some of the numbers and some of the in the sense that as part of the carbon literacy. We unpick what we mean by scope 1 and scope 2 and scope 3 and tons of CO2e and where those numbers are. So it's important that our staff, particularly those client-facing staff, can go out and have an engaging conversation with clients when they start to footprint their own organisations. So it's a bit. So we already ask, for example, for profit and loss accounts and cash flows, but in time, we may be asking for carbon footprints of organisations. And so as they come in, we need to ensure that our staff understand what they're saying, what some of those big numbers are, to go in and kind of get under the skin of some of those numbers and how they can help. I just wanted to kind of, on the back of that particular point, just share with you a particular question that was asked as part of the business panel survey that we conducted. We conducted it, the fieldwork was conducted last autumn. This survey results came out in January this year, but it was stated that 96% of businesses were currently taking some actions to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. But I particularly want to take you down to that very bottom row. So they're measuring our emissions. So it's quite stark that 50% of the businesses, and there were over 600 businesses responded to this question, were not planning to measure their emissions in the next 5 years. And for us, the measurement is critical. Unless you measure what your carbon impact is, you don't know where the biggest savings are going to be or the biggest impacts of the things that you can take forward and do. So I suppose if in 5 years' time we flip that and there's only 20% not planning to do it or plan to do, that would be a great result. So that kind of brings me on to our approach to understanding our clients' net zero journey. And again, just to reiterate, the clients, they're not just businesses and social enterprises, they are enterprising communities of place. And top right there, first one is measure. So I'm not going to go into all these in detail, but the measurement piece is integral to this. And again, we're looking at engaging clients and communities on carbon literacy. There may be sector-specific footprinting tools. So, for example, we'll be looking to encourage our clients to footprint themselves. There are a number of different tools. There's some really good tools and information on the SME Climate Hub, for example, and the new normative tool that BEIS are supporting, round to minimising their emissions and actually giving them special advice and signposting and funding through to monitoring and managing. So we're just starting to kind of put the detail behind some of this. Really key at the moment is to encourage the clients that we're working with to do that measurement piece and start opening that conversation about what they could do next. And now I'm kind of moving, I suppose, a little bit more into the regional space. So again, this is another tool, BEIS supported tool, and again, it's framing the place in terms of the south of Scotland, both Dumfries and Galloway and Scottish borders. So this is, I suppose again, this is the authenticity piece. This is disaggregated national data. So there's a challenge there with what that data is telling you. But what it does start to do is give you a fuzzy picture, a bit of an outline as to some of the key areas that we need to be tackling here in the south of Scotland. Agriculture is clearly a big one, and I suppose that is supported by, we know that, for example, 50% of Scotland's dairy cows are all in Dumfries and Galloway. So we need the local data, the data sets, to start to weave in with the national data sets to start to refine that picture and understand which sectors, which places need our support and can make the biggest impact and accelerate some of that transition. So one of the things that we are looking to do at the moment is to develop a South of Scotland net zero route map. We recognise that in terms of Scotland's overall 2045 target as a region, given our natural resources and natural capital, we will have to make a climate positive. We need to get to a climate positive position. We're working and collaborating with both local authorities on the route map. There's a shared ambition and understanding and vision that we want to articulate what needs to happen in the region. Again, picking up on some earlier points about aggregating up some of these opportunities so they're of a scale that can attract inward investment. We're tackling the route map in a number of phases. The first is to kind of look backwards and understand the region's current and historical carbon impact, both on an emission and sequestration piece. And again, that's where the data sets are really important. The second part would be to start looking forward. So this is modelling some net zero pathways for the region by sector, by subsector, by place. And this is kind of predicated on the Committee on Climate Change's UK and Scotland pathways. That's kind of where we're looking at in terms of those modelled pathways. And the third is that engagement piece. It's getting down to the ground, catalysing, stimulating, accelerating the conversations within places, within sectors, subsectors, and commit them to take action on the back of the evidence that we've pulled together in phases 1 and 2. So a quick reference to the Net Zero Commission. That is something that we've established here in the south of Scotland, which brings together local, regional and national stakeholders. And they're really there to unlock the opportunities that we see across the south of Scotland, take down some barriers if there are barriers, for example, that need to be gone over. And a good example would be, in terms of phase 1, we'll be going out to that commission and asking them to put forward the data sets that they own that would help create that picture for the south of Scotland. It could be SEPA data sets, it could be NatureScot data sets, it could be energy data sets from the local energy network, for example. And the other quick reference there is the energy transition group. So we recognise that energy is a key enabler to kind of unlock the transition to some of the other sectors. A piece of work was done about 18 months ago, which resulted in a publication called Powering Change. We are repurposing and reinvigorating that group through a colleague of mine, and broadening some of its outlook to include areas like hydrogen, for example. So that's just another snapshot of how we're looking to take forward what we're doing in the south. One final thing to kind of raise, and again, this is picking up on that collaborative proposition and nature, and that's the work we're doing with CivTech. So for those that aren't aware of CivTech, CivTech is a Scottish government run funded program where the public and third sector come forward with problems or challenges, and the private commercial sector come back with proposals within which they can meet those. And it tends to be a technological solution, a digital solution, a data solution, for example. And we have got 5 challenges currently, as you can see on the screen there. 2 were from last year, which was CivTech 6. The sprint refers to a slightly accelerated period within which that process is taken forward. The commercial companies go through, it's effectively a procurement process, and they go through different stages and get funding to work up the solution depending on which stage they get through. We've currently got 2 live challenges just now in terms of CivTech 7. One's around cycling infrastructure, and the other, which I'm quite heavily involved in, is around CivTech 7.7, so that's decarbonising energy. Now, I could have spoken lots of other areas that we're proactively taking forward, and I've just thrown them up there. I'm not going to go through them, but it's my task is to kind of weave those together as part of this approach. But I would like to, I suppose, finally end on it's framing that opportunity. It's showing what the opportunity is in this space and presenting that opportunity, be that to inward investors, be that to places of communities and businesses. So for me, I would end on that note, is how can we best frame that opportunity to make that transition. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Colin. And really excellent. And I know that, colleagues, the slides will be available on a recording afterwards. So some incredible and excellent information there, Colin. And I'm very taken by how you've taken that regional approach, but also work with the contexts of the rural economy, the rural dynamics, and that really powerful statistic about 50% not measuring, and the challenge of getting people in on the journey and getting on the front foot to frame and take those opportunities. So really powerful. Thanks so much. If I could go to Leonora Gircheva from the Donut Economics Action Lab, just to kind of maybe build on that, because I think there's some real powerful resonance with what both Colin and Sam have laid out. So Leonora.
Thank you. And let me just see if I can start sharing. Am I sharing my screen? Yes, great. So I'll be taking a bit of a zoom out to a lot of a bigger perspective, and then zoom back into the scale of places that we're talking about here. And thank you for having me today. I'm from the Donut Economics Action Lab, which is the organization that was co-founded by Kate Rayward, the author of Donut Economics, which was this book. And the lab exists to really support change makers around the world that are turning these concepts into practice and into action. So I'm going to share today a bit about what Donut Economics is and how this is then being turned into action on the ground. So zooming back out to the reason of why we're having this kind of bigger conceptual conversation, and recognizing the times that we find ourselves in, that beyond the climate crisis that we're currently in and we're addressing and we're talking about today, we've also started this century with financial meltdown, with COVID lockdowns, with multiple social crises, the rising cost of the living crisis. All of this overlapping social and ecological crises are to some extent coming or directly being caused by the economic systems that we've inherited, systems that are based on never-ending growth, on never-ending expansion of resources, of finances, of use of land, of extraction of materials. So we're kind of reaching a point when we need to be recognizing as humanity that we need to be changing the definition and the vision of how progress should look like in the 21st century. And this is where the donut comes in, proposing that shift from the 20th century goal and idea of progress, which was GDP growth, towards a 21st century, fit for 21st century vision for progress, which is really thriving in balance. And I'll go into what the donut really is, and you will clearly see how it's a sister concept with well-being economics. So, and we can see that Scotland has already been taking steps towards this change of the goal and shifting the way of thinking towards how progress should look like. And donut economics really offers an approach and a way of looking that develops that into a detailed vision. So what you see on the screen is the donut, and to explain this visual, imagine humanity's use of resources, of Earth's resources, radiating from the center of the circle to the outside of the circle. In that hole in the middle, you have where people are falling short on life's essentials. So in the hole in the middle, there's human deprivation. People don't have enough water, enough food, enough equity or housing or income or access to energy. So we want to use enough resources that get everybody out of that hole and over that social foundation and into that safe and just space for humanity in the green space of the donut. However, as we collectively use Earth resources to get everybody out of that hole, we shouldn't be going over the ecological ceiling of our planet. We shouldn't be pushing over those outer boundaries of the donut, because that's where we start breaking down Earth systems. We cause climate change, we cause a hole in the ozone layer, we cause a biodiversity crisis, we lose waters, we pollute too much land and we extract too much materials. And all of this is tipping the planet out of balance. So the vision that the donut offers is to meet the needs of all people within the means of the living planet. And you will see that these themes on the inside, the social foundation of the donut, meeting the needs of all people, are themes that are drawn from the Sustainable Development Goals that have already been agreed by all global governments. And on the outside, the themes of the ecological ceiling are the 9 planetary boundaries, which have been identified by Earth system scientists just over a decade ago, of which climate change is one, but individibly linked to many of these other systems, from biodiversity to ozone to land convergence, etc., that are keeping the planet in balance. So if this is the vision of progress, then how are we currently doing towards achieving it? And this image on the screen shows us that we are currently living far out of balance. Based on quantifiable indicators, both on the inside and on the outside of the donut, we can see that humanity as a whole, we have billions of people that are falling short on life's essentials. And at the same time, we have been crossing the boundaries, the acceptable boundaries of multiple of these planetary boundaries. And this image is sadly not even updated with the latest research on chemical pollution and freshwater withdrawals, which weren't quantified until now, and will now be adding more red wedges to this mirror of humanity. So we are kind of the first generation to really have the science and the knowledge to be able to see this mirror of humanity and to be having the responsibility really to take action to start reversing it. And if this is the global mirror, this image looks very different for all countries in the world. Every nation must transform. And if we look through the lens of the donut, no country is a developed country. We're all developing countries, as we all must be moving towards reducing and removing those red wedges on the outside and on the inside of the donut. But the journey may look very differently from Malawi, where many people are falling short on essentials, are living in deprivation, but the country is living well within its planetary boundaries, isn't really putting any pressure on the planet. And on the other side, we have countries like the UK and the United States, where generally looking across the country, people's needs are met to a higher level. Of course, this doesn't go into the granular details of places and large inequality, but as a whole, the countries are doing much better, but the pressure that they're putting on the planet is way beyond what it should be. So every nation must be going on a journey of transformation. So what does that mean when we scale back down to the scale of a place, of a city, of a town, of a village? And this is what we at the Donut Economics Action Lab have been working on, and many cities around the world have started asking this question and turning these concepts into some sort of practice. And really the kind of the starting framework to scale down this global vision to the level of a place, when we ask this question of, can our place live within the donut, and can our place help humanity move towards that safe and just future? We must look into that. We must unroll the donut, as we call this conceptually, zoom into that green space and ask the question, how does this safe and just future look for our place? And then once we zoom, we recognize that those two sides of the donut, the social foundation and the ecological ceiling, really become 4 lenses, because as we look at our places, we need to be thinking both about our local aspirations as a place, as well as our global responsibilities towards the planet, towards communities worldwide. So the question, the overarching question and vision for places then becomes, how can our place become a home to thriving people in a thriving place, while respecting the well-being of all people and the health of a whole planet? And this question has 4 questions, and what we call the 4 lenses of the donut. And I'll go through them one by one. We have the local social lens, asking, how can all the people of our city thrive? And this is about understanding, really understanding what it means for people in our place to thrive. And all of these things are, of course, linked in many different ways with the climate change and with the need for a just and fair transition to a zero future. So we're asking, how can all the people of our city thrive? How can we provide for all the people in our place? And what does thriving really mean? Because it looks differently for all different cities and different places. And the second lens, the local ecological lens, asks, how can our city be as generous as the wildland next door? And this is about looking at our local ecology and understanding and recognizing that every place was built in the natural habitat, whether it was a wetland or a forest. It was built in nature, and nature keeps itself in balance. It cleanses air, it houses biodiversity, it stores carbon, it does not produce waste. So drawing from concepts of biomimicry, which is really matching, learning from nature, this question asks, how can we be as generous as the wildland next door? So how can we be learning from what the natural habitat next to our place does and match that in the way that we plan and we build and we design our cities? How can we go beyond sustainability, beyond sustaining nature and towards actively restoring and regenerating nature? Because we're past the point where sustaining it is enough now that we've kind of entered this period of crisis. And then we zoom out to the global lenses and we ask, how can our place respect the health of the whole planet? And this is about recognizing the impact that our city, our town has on those planetary boundaries, whether through CO2 emissions, whether to the waste we're producing and exporting, whether to the fertilizer we use in the way that we grow food. So how can we be changing what we do in our place to reduce the pressure that we put on the planet? And finally, the last question, the global social lens, is asking, how can our place respect the well-being of all people? And this is about recognizing that in a globalized world that we live in, all places are linked to communities around the world, whether it's through global supply chain or through humanitarian corridor links or through climate change impacts on different communities. How are the actions that we're taking in our place having impact on communities worldwide? How are the materials that we've used in our place to build a building here? Where were those materials extracted from? Where were they transported? Where were they stored? How were they produced? Where were the factories in which the pieces were developed? And what were the working conditions of all of those communities that were contributing to the things that we use in our place here? So once we have these four lenses become this holistic vision and holistic lens of thinking of our places and taking action towards a safe and just future. And they can become a framework through which we're thinking about visions, about policies, about strategy, about action plans. We could be looking at a bigger vision of places, or we can be focusing on a climate change vision, on a net zero strategy, and putting it through this framework and asking, how is this contributing? How is this answering all of these questions? How is this helping us move in that safe and just space? And one of the ways in which this has been specifically developed into a methodology that is being picked up by cities is through what we call the data portrait of a place. So turning these four lenses into a data set, really. And the way that the data portraits of a place works is looking across the themes. Each of these four lenses has many themes, these icons in white that you will see. So the data portrait of a place asks us to zoom into each of the lenses, and for each theme, compare a target that our place has to a best available performance indicator on how we're currently doing towards achieving that target. So this isn't about creating new data sets. Things have been said today about the inconsistency of many different demands of places to be creating different indicators and different data sets. This is about using what's already there and building it together in a consistent, holistic view. So drawing from the targets that your place already has across your vision, across different sectoral policies, what is the target that you have for mobility in this example? And in the example of the city of Amsterdam, they've done this portrait. They had a target, the city is accessible to everyone via public transport in a safe and accessible way. And then as a snapshot, they've looked for indicators that are closest to showing how close is the city to achieving that target. And they've chosen the number of average journeys by bikes residents have taken and how they've rated public transport. So sometimes these targets are very specific. They have years. They'll have something as specific as reducing carbon emissions by 30% by 2025. And sometimes they'll be quite vague. But what the portrait invites places is to build this holistic picture that will not only allow you to start having a dashboard through which you can measure and track the progress of your place and the ambitions of your place, identify the interconnections and start thinking beyond silos, but also identify the gaps in data and knowledge. Cities like Amsterdam, progressive, ambitious cities that were doing this through this process realize that they have no target and no relevant data for food. They have no ambitions for food, which is so closely linked to setting high ambitions on carbon reductions, etc. So that's one kind of big methodological approach, along with other different frameworks that we're developing in the lab. And many cities around the world have started picking up these concepts that are very flexible, very adaptable, and ultimately places are contextualizing them and turning them, working within their own possibilities, political will, challenges, and obstacles, and turning them into different sorts of actions. Cities from Toronto to Thimphu in Bhutan, from Yerevan in Armenia to Cali in Colombia, from Brussels to Amsterdam, all of these cities are in one way or another starting to explore the concepts of donut economics. And because we don't set specific policy pathways for places, they come with their own outcomes and their own ways of turning them into actions. And we see it happen in many different ways, from adopting donut economics as a concept, as a compass, as a guiding framework, to developing these data portraits or monitoring tools, to designing decision-making processes or developing specific sectoral plans, strategies, and projects, to kind of using it as a tool for building collective visions, enabling different city actors and holding conversations across sectors through really analyzing the very design and organization of cities and how adapted they are to responding to the challenges of the 21st century. And at the same time, communities around the world are using this concept to kind of start action from the ground up, kind of in creative, playful ways, having conversations, building collecting visions, talking to children, having conversations with children in school, working at many different levels of creativity with these concepts that have resonated as a way to kind of build a collective understanding that kind of really bridges different sort of divides, from political divides through kind of geographical divides, and offering this simple language of understanding each other. And just to conscious of time, so I'm going to very glimpse through a few examples of what's happening around the world. So we have places from Amsterdam to Barcelona to Glasgow to London, Leeds, Yerevan, and many others that have started by developing this city portrait through creative processes, online and offline, doing these workshops with stakeholders within city and outside of the city to develop this holistic data set as a starting point, as to getting the conversation going and towards changing that way of thinking of how the progress of a city should look like and how it should be tracked. Nanaimo, the city in Canada, has been using donut as a unifying framework, adopted a council motion to use it as a unifying framework across strategy and policy making, and have then been gradually bringing that kind of vision supported by a data dashboard into different areas, from procurement to investment to land use development. Seeing here on the screen an example of kind of scenario planning, comparing different land use scenarios with the possible impact across the different areas of this social and ecological side of the donut, and then using that as a decision-making support mechanism to see, what scenario is most aligned with the vision for the future and with the impact that the city wants to have on the planet. In Brussels, they've been taking this approach of working on several levels, from macro to nano, macro being the regional data dashboard and vision, the meso being looking at individual policies, individual strategies, and how can they be really rethought through these four lenses, through the framework of the donut. To a micro scale, looking at individual organizations, community groups, different actions across the city and how the regional government can be supporting them, to the nano level, looking at individual objects and how they have impacts across the four lenses and the kind of the individual accountability and impact that we have on the planet. And finally, just a couple of examples of community-led work, one in Birmingham, where a group called Civic Square is doing this kind of long-term experiment of donut economics on a neighborhood level, really embedding themselves in a neighborhood and working with children, with residents on a long journey of kind of education and re-education and learning and experimenting of what it means to be living within a donut on a neighborhood scale. So from jointly learning food growing methods that are regenerative, to understanding the local soil and ecology, to pursuing finance and programs for retrofitting the area. They're doing all these sorts of experimenting at a neighborhood scale. And finally, in Amsterdam is one of the places where we can see action being taken on both sides, both from the city that has embedded donut economics in their circular economy, and on the ground from a kind of self-organized network, bringing together a lot of change makers that are doing different various regenerative projects on the ground that resonate with donut economics. And finally, I'm just gonna to do justice to all the work that's being done, I'm gonna invite everybody that is interested, that wants to learn more, to come to our platform, which works as a way, as a place where everybody that's working on these concepts across the world is sharing back their stories. On one side, we share these tools, whether it's workshop or methodological tools that can be used by places, by communities, by cities, and at the same time we have a big community of action, of community practice that you can join, and all of these change makers sharing their stories of practice in their own place, including a kind of a series of webinars where you can hear a bit more about the specific case studies and the actual work they're taking there. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Leonora. Thanks, huge depth of research and engagement globally. So thanks so much for that. What I suggest now is that if we can bring Leonora, Colin, and Sam back onto the stage, please, that would be really great, just for a little bit of interaction, and also I'd invite the audience with any questions, challenges, confusions even, so that happens too, to kind of bring it in and just engage with the audience. So please encourage you either to put your hand up or to drop something in the text, and we'll kind of fill up on that. So just by way of starting off, there's been a huge amount shared, and thanks everybody for that. I really liked what you're saying, Colin, around framing opportunities, but doing that in a way that respects the context of where you're at. So whether you're in Kirkcudbright or whether you're in Dumfries or whether you're in Amsterdam, so framing opportunities in the context bit. But two things that seem to come out quite a lot, I felt, across all of the bits, were the portrait of the place. That depends on the lens that you take. And also in the chat that a number of colleagues have talked about some of the capacity issues around carbon literacy and the training and the empowerment kind of bit. So how do we make things easier, more accessible and adoptable, if you like? So whether you're in Kirkcudbright or whether you're in Amsterdam or whether you're in the government, easier, accessible and adoptable. So on the place scale, but also on the kind of wider scale. And so maybe Sam, just to kind of go back to your point, because you made a big point around the accountability kind of base. So there's something around, in what we've shared, making it easier, accessible and implementable.
Right. I remember a few years back, quite a few years back, actually been invited to a training session on carbon. We'll be able to
You're breaking up, unfortunately, Sam.
Carbon, and needs to have some basic capabilities. I said, how many capabilities? I said 98. So that kind of didn't happen. We're back again.
You're back. You're all good.
Sorry. Yeah. I think central government just censoring me as I keep talking. So somebody with a mute button somewhere. I am a great believer, as you know, Darren, here on storytelling, and often missing from all of us is we present a very complex and very detailed picture of the planet and all the variables, but we've often missed out on what is actually the difference that will make people's lives. Like if we could describe people's lives on the ground and make this really relevant to the context lives, it would make more headway. I was interested when Laura mentioned that scenario planning piece, which is really important. That we always need to start with the story of a place, understand where it's come from, where it stands, where it's feed this topic into it. I think it needs to be part of that story. It can't be a separate overlay or something else we think about. It needs to be part and parcel. But I think we're all poor, I'm sure Leonora's colleagues accepted, at describing to individuals, here is the difference, here's how your life will be in 10 years' time when we take this approach. I think that would make a vast difference to making it accessible, make a vast difference to the conversation we have, and also make it about their lives, not our interests.
So building on that, Colin, if I may, there's a, you talked about some of the agricultural pieces, about the present area bits, so if you're talking to a farmer, how do you make it relevant, but also their family and their community? So just building on that storytelling bit, what approaches and evidence and challenges have you had, engaging with communities and businesses and partners about how to make it real on the ground across south of Scotland?
There's a couple of things from my perspective. One is, yes, you're right, you have to get down on the ground and go into those places and understand the perspectives that they're coming from, understand what is pertinent and the, there are many different doors into the conversation around how you get to net zero, and it's understanding what the hooks are for that person, that business, that community, in terms of engaging that on that conversation. What I would like to bring in, and for me, and you kind of referenced it earlier, Dermot, is that the carbon literacy. I can't underplay how important that was for us as an organisation. So we, there's 4 of us in the net zero team, right? But now I have 120 net zero advocates out there doing that job for me, and given that there's that capacity building, they don't have to come back to me for certain things. I've actually, they can go out there and confidently communicate the stories and the vision that we have for the south of Scotland. So yes, it's a day's worth of training that they've done, but it's certainly empowered the whole organisation, and people are kind of putting their hand up saying, well, what more could I do? So to kind of unlock that capacity, I think there's some real value in investing in that carbon literacy piece, and that's probably what I would probably really want people to take away from this.
Super, brilliant. So there's something around the storytelling seems really important, so that it's relevant in Kirkcudbright, it's relevant at the region, it's relevant, so people kind of go, right, I get it, I'm with you and get it. So that's good. So that's one bit. But also your point about different doors, so that you might have to kind of work with people in the stories to be able to kind of get in. Where's the right starting point with the farmer? Where's the right starting point with the entrepreneur? Where's the right starting, wherever it is. But also that point then around building system change through advocates. I thought it's a really interesting bit. So if we're able to kind of invest to empower, if that makes sense. So as you did, so you have the knowledge, created that training bit. Now you've got advocates within the community, within the sector, kind of moving on. And presumably there's a feedback loop there, Colin, somehow, where people are finding things and saying, listen, Colin, you need to think about this. So is that kind of how it works? So it's not just about the structural change, about regional economic partnerships. It's about on-the-ground network system change, making it easy, making it accessible. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, completely. And I think those doors are quite interesting, because you might have someone come to you who wants green accreditation, for example, or the supply chain, they're part of the supply chain and they're large corporate customers saying, we want you to do A, B, and C. So there are so many different doors in which to come in. It's finding what hook to bring them in on, and then engage them on that conversation and support them on their journey, because it's not quick, it's not easy, it's going to require investment. But at least if we can talk the same language and convey that storytelling where we want to take it, then yeah, we should accelerate that transition.
There's also something, using an idea in health and social care, for example, or in the community and third sector, about no wrong door. So if we spend a lot of time trying to figure out the specific door, then that's a lot of time. But if it's any door will do, in you come, and behind the door, there's somebody that will help. So that means there's a system design of us on the other side of the doors, so to speak, joining it up. So on the outside, any door will do, and on the inside, join it up. Are we joined up?
Well, we're trying, I would say. I think we are. That's certainly something, that's the approach that we're looking to do here in the south of Scotland, is to really collaborate and partner up and have those conversations and be open. Yeah, so I think that it's starting. There's a long way to go, but the conversations are happening, and there's shared ambition as well. You know, there's just, and if you have that shared ambition and vision, then you can move things forward, and the resource. Yeah, go for it, Sam. Sorry.
No, my apologies. It's interesting that the machine works, and I'm interrupting you. My apologies. I'd probably argue with that. Not a specific organisation, Colin. I think there's lots of good examples of shared ambition. There's lots of organisations that are doing stunning work, by the way, stunning work, often in very difficult, resource-poor environments. But if you bring it back to place, do we have places which are joined up? We have those emerging. I think there's some interesting work around climate action towns, for example, that's emerging. But what we don't have are those diverse interests generally coming together in a place, who represent different levels of decision making, different types of size of agencies with different interests, saying we have some shared ambition. That's why the donut economics is so interesting, because it gives us a way of linking those, which actually are all the same, or about the same thing. So I've got a long way to go about making sure that in a particular place or in a particular location, the circumstances of a community's life are brought together around this topic. And that's why I think the story, again, coming back to that story, is so powerful. The people need to see that story as not another story or a competing story or a story for another agenda, which has been, they may feel is being imposed on them, but actually is integrated into the way they intend to live their lives in the future. I think that challenge is still open.
So just on that, and then Leonora, like you've laid a really powerful global evidence of the issues, the approaches, the potential, and inside of that, and I mean this in a nice way, you probably are noising up politicians, officials, and community, kind of doing it all together. So building that point that Sam and Colin are wrestling with there on the stories bit, what have you found across all of your work really works to get that storytelling to work, to galvanize the collective leadership? So you've got the data and all the lab is awesome, that's brilliant. But at a certain point, it kind of comes down to a crunch of influence a person in front of you. What have you found in trying to influence the people in front of you to take on the story, to do the work?
Well, I can speak from the learnings of the people on the ground that have been doing the work, because that's not us. Every place, we don't go out and lobby cities and lobby politicians. We kind of, as an organization, as a principle, we go where the energy is one of our mottos. So we go where there's already interest, and we believe in the power of kind of peer-to-peer inspiration. So where there's already interest and energy, they get things started, then they show what they're doing, they inspire others. There's never really need to go but learning from those individual places that are facing their own challenges to convince, there's an interest starting from one department, but they're struggling with the politicians, etc. Even there, we're seeing what, as Colin said, there's no wrong door. There's always someone to start building a conversation with on one side. There's in every place they find, whether it's from a city scale or from a community scale, there are loads of people, maybe invisible to you in everyday life, that are already having the same conversations, the same passions, the same interests. It's just about kind of starting to build those kind of collective ways of thinking. But I think in terms of the power of storytelling and what matters there and what works and what has worked for people that are doing this work on the ground is the simplicity of that uniting vision. Because as Sam said, absolutely, kind of the work needed means to be made accessible by making it relatable to every individual and every community and their own story and their own future and their own work and then their own starting point. But at the same time, they all need to come together around a collective vision that everybody can get around. Otherwise, what are we all working towards? Otherwise, how do you bridge those silos? And I think the advantage of the donut approach is that it weaves in a very simple storytelling way, that systemic way of thinking, of bringing together the social side, the environmental side, of hosting in a diagram everything from, one person farmer's struggle with fertilizers and someone else's struggle with the fuel poverty and someone else's fight for climate change and someone else's struggle about their child care. So all of these things, because people in everyday life, and I have worked and talked to a lot of communities on the ground, the way that we work as institutions, as cities, as government works in silos, but the way that people think and experience their life is in systems. So people actually don't think separately, environmental, social, they think about their everyday life, and everyday lives interweave everything. And that's why these concepts of storytelling that have that capacity to weave all those stories experience together, that's what ends up resonating with both politicians and communities on ground. And that's what we're learning from people. It's that simplicity of holistic that's a non-divisive concept because it hosts it all.
Brilliant. Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. And thanks everybody for your contributions, for the questions. There's a powerful question that Pam Reed has put in that I'm going to come back to, and I'm going to ask all of the panel a bit later on about the opportunity and potential of a foundation economy. But if I could just close this session around that kind of endpoint that you mentioned there, Leonora, about stories helping us understand the systems of everyday lives, and that making it relevant, making it accessible, really great. What we have now is my apologies, it's a lot of noise outside the door. 5-minute break, and then we'll come back, and there'll be a poll up as you're having the break, and we'll see you in 5 minutes. Apologies for the noise. Okay, brilliant. Thanks so much. Just to kind of, the Mentimeter is available and the poll is available as we proceed. So please feel free to kind of contribute, put it in. Some really powerful insights coming forward around the importance of retrofit, the idea of educating decision makers, investors, communities, the idea of inclusion, so that it should involve different people at different levels of the system, innovation sides around greenhouse gas scale innovation and how that would support system change, but also articulation and clarity on the benefits of net zero transition and the skills needed. So quite a number of very useful and powerful insights coming forward. We'll come back to this, but thanks so much for filling it in, and please keep that moving. So with that, this part of this session, we've got 3 fantastic speakers who are going to share some insights just around the greening and blue infrastructure of Scotland's places and how that affects the economy and how that then supports the journey for place-based net transition. I know that internet has been a challenge and there has been a massive amount of noise outside the door here. So technology does its thing, but we'll work with it. And I know that one of our colleagues, in particular David Stewart from the Scottish Land Commission, has some internet issues. So David will speak, but we won't see him. But we have a brilliant opportunity to engage with Chris Breslin from Stantec, previously of Scottish Canals, did fantastic work up there and ongoing in Stantec. Fraser Crichton doing brilliant work up in Dundee around the corporate fleet operations and looking at the net zero. And then David Stewart also picking up on the Scottish land issues and the opportunity at community and wider pieces. So if I could invite Chris just to kind of give us an overview, Chris, if you're there, of some of the opportunities and challenges around green and blue infrastructure from your perspective, Chris.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Indeed we can, good to see you.
And I was wanting to share one image with you if I can, if that's okay. Tell me if this works. So thanks for the opportunity. It's just 5 minutes, isn't it? You want some feedback on this?
Yeah, so I don't see the image yet, but if you...
That'll be me, don't worry.
Okay, yeah, perfect.
So you can see it. Now, first thing is, if one of my ex-colleagues at Scottish Canals, Peter Robinson, showed you this slide before, I do apologise. But it is, for me, it captures the blue and green infrastructure challenge and opportunity across, I mean, you could say this for any urban city in the UK, perhaps, but this is a project that was called the Clay Pits in North Glasgow, an area struggling and has been for decades with social, economic and environmental decline. And it's a project that has delivered amazing natural benefits, flood benefits, and unlocked development opportunities in this part of the city. And just thinking about some of the things that the previous speakers were saying, and also trying to, I suppose, open this conversation out about blue-green infrastructure, and thinking about some of the things Sam said, the importance of local place here is so critical. The actions that people took, you know, organisations, big public sector organisations, it's because of what local people said they wanted to see happen in their area. That's the only reason this really came about. But it took a lot of work, and it wasn't easy to get to this. And I suppose that's my other thought in this. It could be easier, and maybe I'll explain what I mean. So some of the challenges around this, and it's the creation of a local nature reserve in this part of North Glasgow on what was a vacant derelict land site, of which Glasgow has many, and many other UK cities do. But it took, from the idea to actually delivering something like this, it took well over 5 years to actually do it. So the people that you maybe spoke to 5 years previously, and it's a terrible thing to say because of the health statistics in North Glasgow, some of those people are dead now. They didn't get to see what was eventually delivered on the ground because it took so long. And that's because it took 17 different funding agreements to get the money to make something like this happen. So it's great that we got the money. When I was at Scottish Canals, I'm still involved in this kind of work now. And I'm trying within Stantec now, a huge multinational corporation, trying to use my knowledge and make this happen elsewhere, but it's not always easy. And I don't mean this in a kind of negative way. I want to finish positively, and I will do. But when I first worked in Glasgow City Council nearly 30 years ago as a young planner, graduate planner, and I had some nice ideas about what to do with some unloved green space in the city, I was told that nobody would maintain it and that there was a problem with maintenance. And I'm now working on several Levelling Up Fund bids across the UK, quite a few in Scotland. Not pointing any fingers anywhere, but again, if you want to improve green infrastructure and blue infrastructure, my goodness, it gets down to the nuts and bolts of how stretched are council departments just now, and how able will they be to look after some of these areas that everyone has wonderful ideas for, but if there isn't a management and a maintenance plan in place, how's it going to happen? And what happened in the Clay Pits is the community have actually taken ownership and maintenance of some of these areas, and that's what's had to happen to make it come to light. So it's a wonderful project. I will finish strong and upbeat. I think the answer to delivering more of these kind of projects around the UK is about getting the community on board, and I suppose trying to share the burden, if that's possible, with them. The private sector is there in the background, as I am, waiting to help and get involved, but if communities don't have money to pay the private sector, then it doesn't happen, and that's quite a sad fact of the matter. But the UK has assets like this all around the country. It just needs us, I think it was one of the previous contributors said, you have to look back before you look forward. We've got derelict infrastructure around the country that just needs to be repurposed and brought back into life. And we've also, the other challenges we have just now, not just the nature and climate challenges, but the food poverty challenges you have. There's land here that could be repurposed for growing. There's opportunities like that could be utilised. We've got entrepreneurs in Scotland and further afield. If we could try and get them into some of these areas to bring, I don't know, vertical farming to parts of the world so that food becomes much more affordable. We won't all be able to drive around much longer if the fuel crisis goes on. So I think, and back to where I started and what Sam mentioned, that whole point about local place, local economies, and local solutions to some of these things is where I would start. And I will stop there, Dermot. I hope that's a helpful initial insight.
Super. Thanks so much, Chris. Yeah, really helpful around the power of local place, local economy, and really struck by your insights about tackling the complexity to frame the opportunities, and something around how processes could be simplified, how we could share responsibilities and burdens across sectors, but also how we invest to sustain. So that maintenance and management piece that you talked about. So don't do it if we're not going to look after it upfront. So really helpful. Thanks so much, Chris, and great to see you. Fraser, if you're there, just to kind of get some insights from your great work up in Dundee, Fraser. Thanks.
Yeah, hello, good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, I've been listening intensely to some of the stuff that's been going on, and probably the themes that I'm going to come out with are so similar to everything that's been said before. I mean, before I even go on to, I mean, you've got 5 minutes to talk about 11 years of what I've been doing. It's pretty difficult, but I think the main thing is that everybody's talking about stories and your own environment, etc. And that just feeds into myself with you know, the Dundee. I work for Dundee City Council, but Dundee's my city. I live here. I have my children here, and hopefully they'll have their children. So everything that, you know, I'm trying to do in the city is all about the future, and it's all about improving the air quality in the environment. So that, you know, you need that narrative behind everything to probably show where my drive comes from. So obviously people will be aware of 11 years ago, I looked at some the e-mobility, looked at where we could move away from diesel vehicles slowly, and trying out 4 vehicles and 4 chargers. But quite quickly I realized that in order to do this, so the targets that people, net zero targets, etc., have been set, you really need to do this holistically as a city, across all sectors, public and private, etc. Yes, I lead by example, and electric bin lorries, electric sweepers, etc., and all the taxis that we've got involved in, and the infrastructure. But it struck me a long time ago that really, and it's so apt just now, is the energy of the future, and renewable energy specifically is going to play such a large part, and certainly in urban areas and across Scotland. So everybody thinks that I only talk about electric vehicles, etc. But in actual fact, what I day-to-day basis think about is the energy to power all this, and how do we move that energy about. It is really crucial to what I do now. And then when you start breaking it down, when you look at strategies of your city, you realize that now we have got an opportunity, because obviously what that drags in is the other modes of transport, sustainable modes such as, you know, walking, cycling, etc. And I'm kind of on vehicles at the back of queue, and rightly so. But what it then drives forward is, what do we want our cities and our Scotland to look like in the future? And can we move this change over? Can we develop charging infrastructure, places where people are going to park their vehicles, shutting off roads, greening areas? It just gives us an opportunity, in my opinion. All this change, technology is driving it. We have an absolutely incredible opportunity here to change the way that our environment is. And I think that's the positive message that I would like to go over from the beginning.
Super, fantastic, and really powerful expression there, Fraser, around as a citizen of the city, but also as part of the infrastructure of change in the city, the motivation to kind of do that, and that vision of the better future, and how we use that to change, challenge, and connect opportunities. So really excellent. Thanks so much for that. David, I know you're having internet challenges, and we mightn't see you, David, but if you're able to kind of share some of your insights just around your experience on Scottish land, David.
Yeah, thanks Dermot, and thanks for the opportunity. I'm sorry you can't see me, but actually I've got a face for the radio, so maybe that's not such a bad thing. What I want to talk about today very briefly is really based around a couple of big pieces of work that the Land Commission have undertaken in the last 2 or 3 years. One is around the reuse of vacant and derelict land, and the second one is from a review of land for housing. I really just want to pick up out a couple of key recommendations that I could think really could help deliver better blue and green infrastructure. So the review, the work on vacant and derelict land, it's a big issue for Scotland. It's been really a legacy of the end of heavy industry. And vacant and derelict land can be hugely harmful, and it's particularly prevalent in poorer parts of Scotland. The review of land for housing, what we find there really is there's a lot of talk about the housing market and homes being too expensive, there not being enough of them. And we find really that that's a result of relying too much on the market to actually bring forward sites for development and to shape that development. So I really want to make two main points. And the first one from the work in vacant and derelict land, there's an argument that we need to stop basing our decisions on land use and investment purely on financial return and the way that public bodies have traditionally been asked to. And instead, we need to take account of wider benefits such as health improvements, green space, and the creation of jobs. And in fact, the Commission actually got Bigger Economics to develop a tool that can be used to do this. And I'll share that after my talk. The second point I want to make is, if you want to create better blue and green infrastructure, then the public sector collectively, I would argue, has to play a much more active role in bringing sites forward for development and in shaping markets. It needs to share the risk with the private sector, but in return, it needs to look for rewards in terms of better green space and better blue-green infrastructure. A couple of examples where I think this has happened from the land for housing work. Obviously, the Commonwealth Games Village is a very well-known example. Glasgow City Council assembled land, decontaminated the site, and they worked with SEPA around flood risk management using nature-based solutions. And what you have in the end is a high-quality place with a river corridor, green space, and active travel. And a second one to mention is the Hamilton Hill project with Scottish Canals, use of green infrastructure rather than grey infrastructure. That's led to quality placemaking, and there's some really high quality housing developments have been delivered there recently. So just to close, I think there's a couple of big opportunities coming forward in terms of policy. There's a national planning framework and its ambitions to create better places, protect the natural environment, and develop mainly on brownfield land. And there's also compulsory purchase order reform, which the Scottish Government have committed to do in the next 5 years. So I think they're big opportunities, but I just really close by emphasising the point that unless we change the way we decide on investment, so we take account of wider issues rather than purely financial, and if we just leave development solely to the market, I don't think we'll achieve those goals, but we can do it, and I'll stop there.
Super, thanks very much, David, and really clear synthesis of a lot of very complex pieces. But I suppose moving across the three speakers, your point, Chris, on the power of local to simplify, share, and sustain, that point around getting the maintenance kind of working, kind of building on your point, Fraser, around shaping, so using the technology change to shape across sectors and shape the future city. And your point, David, then about to do that, we need to kind of think beyond GDP, but also a different role for the public sector, a more enabling role, a sharing role, a kind of a quite active role. So some really interesting bits around shaping, sustaining, and investing kind of coming through. And I'd really invite colleagues either to put your hands up if you have a question, or to put some questions in the chat there. But maybe just to kind of kick it off, Fraser, just building on your point and maybe reflecting on some of the stuff that both Chris and Dave talked about there, about the public sector role that I know you're in, but also that sustaining piece, and I know that that must be a big part of your work, be it the fleet, be it the city, you know. So what are some of the learnings and opportunities that you're getting around sustaining the doing?
Yeah, well, I'll reiterate some of the points that were made there. I think what I would use the word is control. I think local authorities need to have control over the destiny of where we're going. Too often, what happened in my lifetime is we'll leave it to the private sector. They're better at it. Let them get on with it. When in actual fact, the councils and local authorities require. They've obviously got a more holistic view of the community and the needs of the community, as opposed to kind of the point I think David was making there, which is just brutally going out and how can we make a business case out of this environment? We need to make money. So I think there's a huge role, and I think we need to drag ourselves back a bit. And it's a very complex thing to do, which is public and private bodies together driving the society and our environment forward together. And it's sometimes it's an odd bedfellow, you would probably say, but in actual fact, that is probably the most, in my opinion, most prudent way. And it's certainly the point about there's no point in building and changing the environment if you're just going to let it go. There's a really apt point that Chris was making. There has to be a full plan. If you're going to change an environment, how do you sustain that environment long term? And adding to David's point, which is that you need to make sure that everybody's coming with you, but you also need to make sure that I'm losing my drift a wee bit there. I think my whole point here is that if you're going to change your environment, if you've got the people with you, because I don't think we've talked, I know it's talked about, I haven't talked about enough about the communication before you even make that change with the public, the people that are the beneficiaries of this. I think you need to understand that the change has got to be for the future, and we've got to make sure it's sustainable. And as I say, the point made about, which I'm getting back to, which is that it's all about finance. Where it is. I mean, as far as air quality is concerned, etc. You know, in my day, inhalers, for argument's sake, didn't exist when I was at school, and you see them everywhere. So there's definitely problems with the air quality that we know about today. So how are we going to fix that? And it can't just be brutally on making a profit, etc.
Super. Speaking of air quality, there's a carbon monitor here beside me that says I needed to open the window, so apologies for that. But something really interesting on that life cycle piece. So to achieve net zero, we need to think about not just a point in time, but a life cycle piece. And also your point there, Fraser, around relationships and partnerships and that kind of control bit. So really powerful. I suppose maybe, Chris, just could you build on that, just on that relationship and partnership, particularly at that local level? What are, would you say, the things that are needed to make it work?
Okay, thanks, Dermot. Just again picking up something that David also mentioned, that Hamilton Hill housing project that was part of the review of land for housing and a vacant derelict land site for, God, must have been 20 years. The water that comes, any rainwater that falls on that site drains into the nature reserve at the clay pits and then drains into the canal. So I just wanted to kind of bring that back as well. It's a really good example. Just in terms of those local relationships and partnerships, I think, I suppose what I was saying is about it's easy to get money to upgrade things and build new stuff. And I think we have a lot of redundant assets and infrastructure that could be improved. I guess what I was trying to say is it's not so much about the private sector making money. I think communities should be able to make money out of some of these things. And I don't know how you do it, but it just seems to me that if we're asking the community to get involved in helping us look after improved green and blue infrastructure, if that's what we need to ask them to do, and I think we do to make it actually happen, how do we create the right conditions or the right opportunities that communities can benefit from them, not just in terms of the social and well-being that they get from using those spaces and cycling through them, but you know that the example I mentioned was about food growing. You know, can we help communities own food growing projects in those green spaces, for example, or I don't know, the water that falls off roofs into those sites. You know, can that be turned? It's an asset. It's a resource. It's a scarce resource, and sometimes we have too much of it. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, what are the opportunities that maybe we, between the entrepreneurs in the community, the private sector and the public sector and the community, how can we open up chances for them to maybe make something out of those projects, so that they don't just come along and help maintain for well-being? They actually know that their community is making money in some way out of that asset as well.
Yeah, so a sense of the community wealth building agenda there, but also your point, Chris, about creating the conditions and also the trust relationships and the partnering relationship, you know, in a proper way, so the community can raise money, they can do things, they can invest, they can build those capacities. And that really interesting point about reframing assets and how that comes forward. So I'll just hold that for a second. I know that Grant Baxter has his hand up. Grant, are you happy to talk?
Yeah, thanks, Dermot. It was really a point picking up on the work that David was talking about, and maybe going back to the role that Sam was setting out earlier on. Looking at MPF4 and housing to 2040, I kind of felt that there was very much a sort of a stamp from the kind of volume house building industry still on those you know, policies, insofar as the kind of model for delivery of housing, you know, the kind of sort of sausage machine going from housing land, household projections through into the development plan, and then sites being allocated still seem to be there, and that we weren't really shifting away from the kind of model that was really still honestly favouring greenfield edge of town sites over brownfields, vacant derelict sites. And I felt that, you know, there wasn't enough I saw in those policies that was really going to radically change that model, and that kind of as I say, that sausage machine that's kind of taken sites like the Hamilton Hill one, I think, that Chris mentioned, so long to actually come to fruition. So just welcome a few thoughts around that.
Is it okay if I come back on that? Sorry, it's hard for me to do the non-verbal communication at the moment. Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, Grant. And I almost felt, actually, in looking at NPF4, that there's an element of absolutely wanting to create sustainable places and move from greenfield to brownfield. But for me, what's really missing is the story of, how are we going to make that transition? How are we going to support developers to actually do things a different way? And my worry is that either that means you get a lot less housing development happening because developers aren't allowed to build on the sites that their model relies on, or people give in and actually you've got a great policy document, but you don't really change how you deliver. And for me, the way to make the change is about this greater role for the public sector and communities. And when I say that, it's not intended as a public sector takeover at all. I fully agree with what Fraser and Chris have said about partnership. It's really, as much as anything, it's in the public sector playing a fuller role. It's actually supporting developers and reducing risk and allowing them to put more of the profit from land actually into quality developments, or allowing them to do developments in town centres because the risk's been reduced. But yeah, essentially, Grant, I would share your concerns about that. And a bit of a worry in Scotland that sometimes we're very good at policy, but doesn't really get translated into actual on the ground delivery.
Thanks very much, David. And I'm just mindful of our time together, but just as a way of maybe offering some summary of the bits that have kind of come up, and thanks for the audience and colleagues there's something really important around creating the conditions for a different way of doing things, as you say, Fraser, but also David and Grant. And in that condition, there's something around the roles of the public sector, there's something around the strength of partnerships, and there's something about the opportunities of communities taking on an active role. So creating conditions is a strategic piece, but that creating the conditions then also links into a life cycle approach. So it's not about creating the conditions to do one thing, it's about looking across time and how the good thing is sustained and changed and moved. And that along that life cycle approach, we need to build the infrastructure to support people to do different. So it's not enough to say, here's the new way of doing things, but nobody knows how to do it. You need to do it across the life cycle that we've never done it before, and we need to do it quick. So creating the conditions needs to take the life cycle approach, and that needs a scaffolding across so it supports people to do different. And if we don't create the conditions, look at the life cycle and build that support infrastructure, we can't really achieve and sustain net zero places. We can achieve, as you say, Fraser, some sectoral change, but not the whole system change that we're seeking. So with that, what I'm going to do is bring that to a close. Thanks our speakers. Thanks so much, David, for navigating the technology, to you, Fraser, for the great work in Dundee, and also Chris, great to see you again. And we've got a final poll until we hand over the closing comments over to Liz. And I guess one of the things that this conversation for me has raised is there's a lot of complexity, not just in net zero and local and in the wider bits, but also when you bring people together, that richness of that comes out, the potential comes out. So the question really, and as the Menti kind of comes up, is there interest and value in a community of practice around place? So I'll let that come up, and I know that Alison is doing our wonders there with the technology. If you found a Menti, that's the question. So is there value and interest in a community of practice around place? And I suppose to link on to insights that Leonora shared and Sam shared and everybody shared, it's not that the place is an extra over additional sideline thing. It's one of the ways that we do net zero, we do inclusion, we do all of these kind of bits. So I guess for the community of practice, it should be an inclusive and useful thing. So good insights coming back. It's like watching a horse race. So at the moment, very useful is in control, but coming up on the right hand side is slightly useful. So that's kind of useful to know. And then in the middle is fairly useful. So I guess, and fairly useful is 4 furlongs from the end. So it's doing well kind of here. So I think there's a pretty useful, but perhaps the complexity of it means that we need to frame it and shape it and scope it so that it would move from fairly useful to very useful. And there we have it coming into the finish line, very useful win. So anyone that was betting on that, the payout will come soon. So with that, just to say, thanks so much for your participation, for your time, for your interest. And if I may, just to hand over to Liz, the wonderful chair of EDAS, for some closing comments. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dermot, and thanks to all of our contributors today. It's been a really, I think, a really fascinating session. It's interesting. It's been quieter in terms of the chat than we've had in potentially other conference sessions that we had. But actually, my sense is that that's because there's a lot being said. There's a lot, I think, for people to reflect on, and actually to go away now and reflect on, and certainly for us in EDAS to do likewise. It's also, I think, brought home to me, and I'm sure our audience, how, as you say, Dermot, how complex this agenda is, how many moving parts, how many things we have to kind of think about and connect, you know, either as strategists or practitioners. So, you know, I think but equally it's something that is going to, I think, just more and more dominate this whole space that we're in economic development going forward. I'm really interested in what I think there was a kind of common theme coming through from I think the majority of speakers here about really the need for bringing all sectors together and creating spaces for that further dialogue and those conversations. The public sector, interestingly enough, I don't know how many people know this, but they form the majority of EDAS's membership. Over 90% of our over 3,000 members, 2,500 members in EDAS are from the public sector. And we're slowly bringing in, we're starting to see third sector come in more, and community representation at our events, and likewise private sector. And I think that's a really important direction of travel from what we've heard today, because actually all of those sectors have contributions clearly to make to this whole agenda around net zero and placemaking. And so I think it's about how do we make sure that those contributions are promoted through the work that we do here at EDAS, and those collaborations as well. I think also the tools that are out there. I was fascinated with what what was being said by Colin around from SOSI around essentially the training that had taken place to raise awareness, and that built all of those kind of the advocates that could then go out there to really start to kind of again enable that capacity building. I think there's something in that for us to look at. And also the tools that, clearly Leonora was sharing around the donut. And I actually posed a question in the chat box about, I'm really interested to know how many people are aware of that, the 4 lenses approach, and how many people are actually testing that out. Seems to me that has huge potential for where we take things going forward. But all of the contributions here today have been really, really fascinating. So thank you genuinely, everyone, for participating. I know everybody's really, really busy. We will come back and we will let you know what we plan to do on the back of this. This isn't our final conference. We have yet another one to come up. Don't have a date for that yet. We're just sort of in the planning, but to round off this series on kind of climate and people, planet, place, which obviously is our strategic priorities. We will make announcements on that shortly. But again, Dermot, thank you so much in particular for hosting this and keeping things on track and keeping things to time as well, which is excellent. And thanks to all of our contributors this afternoon, and mostly to you, the audience, for staying the course. And I hope it's given you a lot to reflect on now and think about. And we're here to hear back from you about how we can help you going forward with this agenda in the future. So I think through our poll, we've got quite a lot to think about. So thanks, everybody, and we will see you again shortly, I'm sure.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.